Hi, my name's Lindy and welcome to the channel. My website is www.lindycowling.co.uk. Email is info@lindycowling.co.uk. And the title of this short video today is Trip Switches on Consciousness. The trip switches on consciousness. So for those of you that are new to this channel, and really it's a reminder for those of you that aren't, as you know, this is an experiential channel, which means everything that I talk about, share, discuss, are things that I have either experienced personally or am experiencing personally, or have experienced professionally, or am experiencing professionally. For the best part and for the most part, the two things would apply, and usually it's both personally and professionally. I prefer it to be that way and to work that way, and although it has been a long, slow slog doing it that way round, actually doing it experientially rather than tapping in or channeling outside of me, I prefer it that way. And in the end, really, our journey is going to come down to the embodiment of who we truly are in these energies. So I guess best off doing it now than later. So trip switches on consciousness. I've come to realize over a period of time that as you get further into the rungs of your heart consciousness, that is your metaphysical heart portal of consciousness, as you get further into that, you become aware of things that you were never aware of before, and your whole perception and aspects of your reality begin to change. As you get further into the rungs of consciousness of your hearts, you may begin to notice things that you didn't notice before about certain patterns you were running or were involved in, certain behaviors you were running or were involved in, certain belief systems and certain programming that you'd had all of your life. As you get more and more self-aware, more and more sovereign, more and more authentic, more and more your conscious selves, you may discover some of these things for yourself. So I'll give you an example. As you go up and accelerate in your expanded consciousness, you may suddenly come across a sequence of circumstances or a sequence of events or a sequence of things that would usually or formally trigger you into a pattern of behavior or belief or self-sabotage or self-destruct or negativity or the cycle of suffering or unrequited love or a light program. And you may notice this because your awareness is not caught up in a knee-jerk response in it. As you go into the heart, you are able to view these triggers and these trip switches and these cycles back into those programs almost like from a slightly detached perspective, recognizing and realizing, hold on a minute, I would normally do that, or I would normally be pulled into this, or I would normally be behaving like this. But suddenly you're not doing that any longer. if we take this slightly further, I do not feel that these are just consequences of raising your consciousness and coming into your authenticity and coming into your self-awareness, coming into a more ascended self, coming into your true version. I don't feel it is just a consequence of that. I feel that there are also what I am going to call trip switches on human consciousness itself. Trip switches that were not supposed to be there and are not, let's say, man-made or source-made, but are artificially made and have been inserted or implanted into human consciousness for quite some time. And how I feel they operate is when a human individual is about to make the transition, the transformation, the alchemical step from one linear perception of reality to one's multidimensional, expanded, sovereign, authentic self, these trip switches can kick in. So if someone still has that programming, that linear programming, I could almost say artificial programming, still playing out somewhere in their life experience or reality until they reach certain rungs of their awareness in their heart, they can deviate off into certain patterns, certain programs and behaviors. Some of these would be self-sabotage, self-destruct, and it's a bit like I see it, like you're a train going along the track, and if you hit one of these trip switches, suddenly you're diverted off to from where you were going. So you were going this way and suddenly you're off that way on the buffers, or you're going suddenly down a different route or on a not so helpful timeline, whatever language you want to use. And what seems to happen is people then very quickly, if they have traces of that programming still running in their energetic system, in their energetic field, whether that's in body consciousness, mental consciousness, in the layers of energy, the aura itself, whether it's in personality, when this kicks in, if they've got traces of that in there, they can very quickly then not just go into, and this is the definition here, the difference here, not just go into their old stuff, because that is part of it, but I feel that there's a bigger picture here and they can be diverted off into actual programming around that old stuff. So again, someone's going along on the train track, they're going in this direction, they're doing well, they're just coming up into the rungs and the consciousness of their heart, so they're multidimensional expanded awareness, and then suddenly, boom, they hit this buffer, they're knocked this way, one of these trip switches is thrown, suddenly they're on a self-destruct program, a self-sabotage program. They might suddenly be on a very fanatical belief system. That would mean someone who wasn't particularly religious suddenly going fanatically religious, for example. That's one example. Suddenly becoming completely lost when they weren't lost at all. Or very fearful when they weren't fearful at all, emotions coming up that, okay, even if you allow a percentage of it, might be theirs that was suppressed somewhere in the system, you know, in the personality or the energy field. I'm talking beyond this as well. suddenly being pulled into former behaviours that were quite negative, or former lifestyles that were very negative. It's almost like they get suddenly hooked back in very quickly if there are traces of it still in their energy field, if they're not quite up in those rungs of consciousness in the heart yet, into light programs, into unrequited love programs, into self-destruct programs, into worship programs, into codependency programs, and so the list goes on and on and on. And personally, I feel, because it's the nearest way I can describe it, having seen it in myself over the years, but also seen it in others, and as I've got further up into the heart awareness and consciousness of my own, you're able to see these things far more clearly. Clearly, you're able to see these things far more clearly. Maybe not say it clearly, but see it. And you're able to identify them, and you're able to discern. Now, I'm going to give you a really interesting example of this, just a recent one, which is what has inspired this video. So 48 hours ago, I'm kind of jogging along quite nicely, and I think it was something that someone had said, not even face-to-face said, it was via the internet, and it was nothing negative actually at all. It wasn't negative, it was a positive thing. And because I'm up in the rungs of heart consciousness, I quickly recognized what was starting to happen, because suddenly I was looped into very quickly, or I felt the attraction towards, or a little bit of a pull towards, almost like the spiritual ego or spiritual bypassing, kind of an arrogance, but not that really, not just that, it was all of those things. It was almost like a very a sense of like a power trip. Now, I didn't go down that route, and I recognized it as a kind of archetypal thing, and as a kind of belief system thing, almost like I saw as if I were outside of it, so I wasn't drawn towards it, but I could feel it. Almost like when somebody, I would call it the thing when somebody, which I've been talking about, when someone in a position of spiritual clout, shall we say, and influence, would suddenly misuse that. So I recognised this really quick. I mean, I say recognised it within about 5 minutes. And I found it fascinating. It's like, whoa, so had I not been in the rungs of my heart, I can now see clearly how people who aren't would easily be persuaded down that route, because I can't explain it to you. It's not outside of you, and yet it is. It's archetypal and belief systems, but it trips something. And now why I know it trips something is because I did feel some emotion with it, and I felt quite angry, quite irritated, and extremely powerful, but not powerful in a good way. It was like the great and powerful Oz, the great and powerful Oz. I'm trying to explain as clearly as I can. Now, I only recognize this, again, because I'm coming from the heart. So I find it fascinating, and I found it fascinating, and I could see clearly then how people, if they are not quite in those rungs of consciousness of the heart, this trips in, it's like that, and then they can, like that train, suddenly go woo right off in a different direction. Now, how many times have we seen this lately? both in people we know personally, professionally, and people out on social media, people in the public eye, people on YouTube. How many times have we seen them going this direction and suddenly go, whoa? Now, the perception is, well, they've just gotten, it is partly they've got some programming still running or belief systems still running, or they've tapped into an archetypal energy. But I feel there's that last missing piece of the puzzle, which is like an automatic trip switch. That's what I'm going to call it. That clicks on at certain points when humans are just about to evolve into who they really are, they're sovereign beings. Now, I feel, and I'm going to say it again, that these are artificial, modified adaptations to human consciousness that have not been artificially modified on our behalf, but not on our behalf. And I feel it was done a very long time ago. And I feel in some ways it is one of the main ways that we get dragged into things that aren't for our highest good. Yes, there are different levels to it, and you can't get dragged into it once you've reached the levels of the heart, because you can recognize it and you have your own sovereignty, and your perception has changed, your awareness has changed, and your knowing has changed. And yes, you can't get dragged into it if you don't have some kind of history with that program, or emotion connected with that program, or temptation towards that program, or family, soul family, or bloodline links to that program, or a tampered reality, a holographic tampered reality in connection with that program. And that would be another video. There has to be something within you. It could be even a fear. It could even be a fear in you that, oh my God, I wouldn't use energy in that way. Or you've seen how people use that energy that way, and that's the opposite to who you are. And then suddenly it's like being waved in front of you like a carrot. There has to be some kind of either emotional component to it or energetic component to it, not just in favor of it, but sometimes afraid of it, or opposed to it, or polarized to it. But I feel these are trip switches in consciousness. I'm going to call them trip switches on consciousness. Now, you could say to me, how do you alleviate that then? How do you not go down that route? Well, it is a case of your own evolution and consciousness into the heart, where you would recognize it on your stepping stones towards that as you are coming across different layers of stuff in your experience and in your life and in your world. It's a question of looking at them, these belief systems, these patterns, this programming, looking at it from your own linear point of view, but also from the expanded multidimensional view and the kind of family view and the family patterns and the family behaviors, and dealing with these things accordingly. Because as you expand and evolve in your awareness, I can tell you these are the key things that come up. They come up because linear human awareness is all entrenched in programming and belief systems. Most of that, the average human being is totally unaware of, and they live their life and make their decisions according to those programs and belief systems, and according to what comes out the radio or what comes out the television set in the corner. And they dictate and make choices in their reality as a result of what is actually being dictated to them, or what they are hearing, or what conditions they find themselves in or are forced upon them. And they respond according to their beliefs and programming. I was just hesitating there to feel into energetically if these trip switches can be deactivated energetically, just like etheric implants, for example, being deactivated or removed energetically. I personally feel they can. I feel half the battle, for want of a better word, is an awareness, that self-awareness that you are being lured towards an old patterning that you've been carrying out, sometimes not really anything to do with your personality. It's not really even you that initiated that program. You know, it could be in the society or the country or the culture you're in or the family you're in, the blood family, the soul family. It's being aware of these things and really knowing yourself as that where you're getting your buttons pressed and how. Because as you disentangle from this, whether you do it on your own or a series of ways of doing it, or you come to somebody that you know that can help you with that, your perception and awareness will raise anyway, as will your consciousness, and then you will spot these trip switches anyway. I predict that as you get to a certain level of your consciousness, your authenticity, your running your world, you in your world, the embodiment through your heart, that these trip switches become less and less, and in the end, you're not tripped into anything any longer. Not emotionally, not energetically, not physically derailed in that same way any longer, because your perception and reality has changed, your consciousness has changed, and therefore you are not susceptible to it. And I feel that is half of it, more than half of it. That work is half of disentangling that, maybe more than half of disentangling it. And when I feel around it, I was just feeling energetically there, could trip switches be removed without someone, say they had a trip switch into codependency, could it be removed but then they still be a codependent? See, so it's not resonating with me that you just, oh yeah, let's take the trip switch of consciousness out there and then they'll no longer be codependent. It's a two-way street. I've said this for quite some time on YouTube now. There has to be the human component to it as well. Even if we're an unwilling human part of it, an unwilling human component, we have to have our emotional attachment to it, or our energetic attachment to it, whether we meant to or not. So if, for example, you tried to remove a trip switch on consciousness for a codependent person, would that automatically make them non-codependent? I'm not resonating with that. I think that's half of it, but not the whole picture, because if they still had those patterns or emotions within them as a soul thing or a human evolutionary thing, or that was their big learning path, how to learn how to not be codependent, I don't feel that then just someone goes like that, removes a trip switch, and then yay, none of that work has to be done now. I think it's a two-way street, and I think that that end of the equation has to be done first. And indeed, it doesn't really matter which way round you do it, because if that end of the component, the human part of it, has to be done, then you're going to get the end result anyway. If you do the human part of it, you're most of the way there. You're starting to go up in your evolution, your perception and your consciousness anyway. And that's a win-win for you. It's a win-win for everybody. I don't feel you can bypass it by an energetic removal. I mean, I'm hesitating again because I'm feeling into it energetically. I'm feeling into whether there is a proportion of people, say, with codependency that wouldn't necessarily be codependent, but they have a trip switch on consciousness to veer them that way. No, I just got an automatic no on that. So they have to have a genetic, an epigenetic, an energetic disposition, a personality disposition, a blood family or soul family disposition towards codependency to get rerouted onto the buffers, knocked sideways onto it by one of those trip switches. The same as self-sabotage, the same as unrequited love, big abandonment things. They have to have those energetically. Maybe it's a core soul wound, abandonment, pain, loss. Maybe it's it could be along those lines. Even bigger than the personality side of it. But there has to be that component to it as well. So I know this is a slightly different way of doing the video today because I'm literally working out the equation energetically live on camera here as I'm working, and sourcing it energetically to get the answers there. So I hope you found it interesting. It's a different way of looking at things, and hopefully a more helpful way for you to look at things. It doesn't mean to say you don't have to do the groundwork, your personal groundwork at sorting these things out within yourself. And like I say, there are people out there, and including myself, that can help with those kind of things for you, but you may be able to do it on your own using the tools that you've got, or other people in your life, or even YouTubes out there that are helpful to point you in the right direction, like this one, videos. I just find it fascinating and interesting, and for me it's even bigger than that. I have seen that pattern of behaviour up close and personal in people, including within the twin flame union. I've seen this up close and personal, and actually long before that there was someone I knew many years ago who was a soul connection for me, many years ago now. And he was on the cusp of going into his heart, and everything in him wanted to go into his heart. But there was this, what I'm describing now, there was this, just as he's nearly there was a kind of rerouting that was knocking him into a different direction. I do think this is an important video because I do think this is playing a part of why people are reacting and behaving the way that they are. At the last second, when it seems someone is going to step into their sovereignty, they suddenly do a 360-degree turn. Do they really do that from their own free will? Or are they being rerouted by a trip switch on consciousness? I know which one resonates with me. How about you? On that note, I will love you and leave you. As always, thank you for watching this channel. Thank you for supporting me as the channel in all the ways that you do. I hope you're keeping well, and take care until I see you again. Bye.